I'm Chris Hayes in for Lawrence O'Donnell. In 2009, voters wanted change, and they got President Obama. In November, those who actually did said they wanted more change, and so now Republicans are in charge of the House. That's pretty much where the change stops.
Huge change election. Everybody wants change.
This was a difficult election, to say the least.
After the ugly campaigning, a triumphant GOP and the Tea Party revolutionaries.
We've come to take our government back.
Democrats and Republicans decide who will lead their parties in Congress.
Proud to announce leadership for the 112th Congress. Our great leader, Nancy Pelosi.
Joining Reid, McConnell, and Boehner.
Ladies and gentlemen, the next Speaker of the House, John Boehner.
Well, look at that.
Democrats stick by Nancy Pelosi by a 3-1 margin.
Why are you the best person?
Because I'm an effective leader.
And in spite of her being Republican target number one.
Current dollar bill, $75 million spent against one person. And I'd like to see what your ratings would be.
And instead of change from the Republicans,
President Obama's bipartisan meeting to talk about tax cuts and other issues has been postponed. White House said that Mitch McConnell and John Boehner requested the delay. So what happened? You guys are just too busy tomorrow?
Speaker-elect Boehner, you may want to check with him on that.
Are you serious?
If the president invites you, you postpone everything else and you get there.
Political risk here is all on the Republican side.
Stay humble. You got no reason to be cocky.
For the first time now, our Republican colleagues are going to share in the responsibility.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes filling in for Lawrence O'Donnell. Despite heavy losses in the midterm elections, House Democrats voted today to stick with Speaker Nancy Pelosi as their party's leader.
I'm proud to be part of this leadership team. Our consensus is that we go out there listening to the American people. It's about jobs, about reducing the deficit, and it's about fighting for the middle class. So I look forward to doing that with this great leadership team.
Pelosi won the House Democratic leadership by a secret ballot vote of 150 to 43, overcoming a challenge, if you could call it that, from North Carolina conservative Blue Dog Democrat Heath Shuler.
It wasn't about our winning or losing this race, about truly making a difference within our caucus, to ensure that the moderates are heard within the caucus and that we have a seat at the table. And I think that's what most of America would ask, that our caucus move in that direction.
On the Republican side, members elected John Boehner as House Speaker and Eric Cantor as Majority Leader when the next Congress gets sworn in January. The White House had hoped to host a bipartisan meeting of congressional leaders tomorrow, but had to postpone it until November 30th because Republicans said they had a scheduling conflict. Joining me now are Congressman Rob Andrews and Congressman Alan Grayson. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being on tonight.
Good evening.
Congressman Andrews, I want to ask you about this leadership vote. There was an earlier vote to postpone the leadership vote, and that came out with 68 people voting to postpone. Might symbolize that there's a bit more dissatisfaction with the leadership team than was reflected in that final vote. What do you think about that?
Well, I think some people want to take more time, but I think what the American people want us to do is talk about getting them back to work, getting them through this housing foreclosure crisis. And I don't think they want us to spend another 2 weeks arguing with each other about political events in Washington. So most of us felt strongly, let's choose our leaders, let's get back to work, putting the country back to work.
Congressman Andrews just mentioned the foreclosure crisis, which we're going to be talking about a bit later on the show. Congressman Grayson, what kind of action steps do you want to be taken just to deal with the foreclosure crisis? I know it's been particularly bad in your district and obviously in your home state of Florida.
Well, that's right. 68% of the people in Orlando, which I represent, owe more than they own on their homes, and I'm one of them. My mortgage is higher than the value of my home. In a situation like that, people are looking for a recovery in the mortgage market. One thing that has to happen is that we have to continue to have the government underwrite mortgages. The government has been underwriting 95% of all the mortgages in the past 2 years in the United States. The Republicans want to take government out of that business, which means that there'll be no underwriting of mortgages in the United States. Secondly, we're looking for ways to spur the housing market. So, for instance, we can bring back the housing tax credit, which expired. And we can do other things like that to encourage and coax the market back to life.
You know, it's interesting. There's some polling numbers I want to give you, gentlemen, because I think it reflects on where the public is vis-a-vis Congress, which is one of the least trusted institutions in the country. There's a new NBC Wall Street Journal poll finds that just 22% of people believe there will be real change. 73% believe there will be some or not at all. And I think what that reflects is a kind of depressing sense that the status quo in Washington, particularly among the way Congress works, is the thing that rules at the end. How do you, do you think that's what those numbers show, and how do you convince people that that is not the case?
Well, I think what you do is pass laws that would actually fix real problems like Alan Grayson just talked about. And there's a reason why we didn't pass some of them in the last 2 years. His name is Mitch McConnell.
Yeah.
You know, there were proposals that would have helped a lot of those people in Alan's district to get out from under the crisis they're in and let them refinance their mortgage. And the Senate Republicans made a choice. They could either fix the country's problems or put us in a political fix from which we could not escape. And I really do believe they chose partisan advantage in the election over fixing the country's problems, and this is what you get.
There's clearly a kind of structural incentive for Republicans to obstruct. I think they've been essentially doing that and then rewarded at the polls. And I wonder if you can see on the horizon what would change those political incentives, Congressman Grayson, or either of you, because it does sort of seem like they chose this tack. They were going to do anything they could to vote against the president and the Democratic Party. They've now been rewarded in the election, so why change?
Well, of course, they'll change when they're punished for it. And I think what people are going to soon realize is that the reason why Republicans hate government so much is because they're so bad at it. As soon as you give them any sort of power, they're going to drive the country back into the ditch that the president talks about so often, and this time maybe over the cliff.
I think there's a change that's already occurred for at least one Republican. One of their new members from Maryland ran on repealing the health care bill, got up at the freshman orientation and demanded that his government-funded health care start now and not when he's sworn into office. So he's obviously had a conversion about the value of government-sponsored health care because now he wants it.
Well, anyone who gets the bill for COBRA, I think, has that conversion.
Well, I think his comments were cobra like a snake because this guy ran on repealing the health care law. So he's going to, the first vote he casts, or one of the first votes, is going to be to take health insurance away from waitresses and bus drivers and people working in supermarkets, but he wants his right now paid for by the taxpayers.
Can we talk,
figure.
Yeah, can we talk about the tax cuts for a moment, because that seems like agenda A right now in terms of what's going to happen or not happen in the so-called lame duck session. What is the sentiment in the caucus? Now Speaker Pelosi, soon to be Minority Leader Pelosi, has been pretty firm about it, but obviously the White House has signaled maybe a compromise. What do you want to see happen? Do you want just a vote on the middle-class tax cuts, Congressman Grayson?
Well, I think we need to make it clear to people what the choices are. The choices between President Obama's middle-class tax cuts and the Republican George W. Bush tax cuts for the rich. The average millionaire gets an $85,000 tax cut under the Republicans' plan. If you just took that money, which is $100 billion a year just for the millionaires in this country, you could create 3 million jobs paying a decent wage, $30,000 a year. Do the math. That's the way it is. And instead what we're doing is we're allowing each millionaire with U.S. government tax money to buy a Class AE Mercedes-Benz each year.
I think
it doesn't seem to me to be the best use of that money.
I think we should take a separate vote on retaining the tax cuts for the middle class, and then a separate vote on retaining them for the wealthier people in the country. And let's see where people stand. You know, the idea of borrowing money from the Chinese and others so that the wealthiest 2% can get lower taxes, I'm not for that. And I don't think most of the country is for that. Let's take a vote. Let's see where people are.
In fact, we have some polling on that. There's 49% are saying that they don't want tax cuts for the wealthy. 46% want to see those tax cuts for the wealthiest, the top 2%, extended. But how do you game this out in terms of what goes over to the Senate? I mean, this has been an issue both it's going to be an issue in the lame duck session.
You know something, though, that I think one of the mistakes that we made the last 2 years, I think Alan would agree with this, is we have Senate phobia. We worry too much about what they're going to do. Pass what I just said, put it in their laps, and let the public evaluate what they're going to do. Let's do that.
Congressman Grayson, what do you think about that?
Well, I think what we're seeing here is class warfare. In fact, it's class warfare where the rich are winning. The rich have been winning this class warfare for a long time now. We actually had the Republicans say they would hold up extension of people's unemployment benefits. These are the benefits that are keeping people in their houses and not living in their cars. Hold up extension on the unemployment benefits just so we can extend the tax cuts for the rich. What are they thinking? Let's expose them once and for all.
Congressman Grayson, this is the last question I want to get you out of here on this. You're going to be leaving Congress after serving 2 terms, and I'm wondering what surprised you most about the way Congress works, sort of being an outsider, being inside it, and seeing it up close. What do you come away thinking about the institution and its health?
Well, I think that the Senate is utterly dysfunctional, but I will tell you that the House under Nancy Pelosi's leadership reflected in mind a head and a heart. This is someone who actually created an environment that was a supportive environment. She never took out the rubber hose on anybody, as far as I can see, and yet consistently, whenever she needed those 218 votes, whenever those 218 votes were needed in order to accomplish what President Obama wanted to accomplish, she got those votes. And to me, that says it all. She has a head and a heart, and if not for her, if not for Nancy Pelosi herself, we would not have health care for all Americans today.
Very true.
I think that's right. Congressman Rob Andrews and Congressman Alan Grayson, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.